Alright, I am attempting once again to put together a video for our discussion about research. This is literally attempt number 3 at this point. Hopefully it will be the last attempt. It might be the last attempt, regardless of whether it's successful. At any rate, I have found some software that I am currently happy with that hopefully will not crash regularly, and let's talk about research. First off, just some preliminary stuff. There's a reason why I go out of my way to do, this big deal lecture every year for my philosophy classes, for my mythology classes, etc., etc. Research is an essential skill, and if anything, it's just growing more and more essential with every passing year. So I really want to stress this class, and I really want to, make it hands-on and make it obvious and, give you something to look at, so it's not just, me talking vaguely about sources. You're going to get shots of my desktop. You can see, all of my fancy icons and stuff. Sure, you get a little bit of an insight into my life, which I'm sure is just more fodder for you to tease me and, attempt me to play video games online with you. But again, I want to stress, research is super important. And I also realize that for most of you, you probably don't even know how to do it. And it's not anything against you. You're all fine people, and you're all very intelligent, and I don't have anything against any of you. But I realize that between, the fact that it's frankly boring in many cases, and it's presented badly in many other cases, and because your English teachers in high school have way better things to do than try and, work individually with every single one of you and teach you how research actually works, and half of them don't even know how it works, as well as just, you probably had a primer at Sussex or, some other institution where some librarian took you all around and you all looked in bookshelves and they showed you the computer databases, and it was all very awkward and very inconvenient. You probably spent half the time on Facebook or your phone anyway. I realize that there have been multiple attempts to get you to do and learn how to research, and that they've probably all failed at this point because most of those attempts are kind of bad. I'm here to fix that. In the next hour, we're going to go through the whole process of what is research, start to finish. Why are we doing it? All the way up to how to do it at, the ground level. And this is essential. Take this outside of this class. Absolutely use it for the paper that I've assigned, but absolutely use it for other papers as well. And more than just papers. Use it in your everyday life. This is the way that information works. Information is power in this day and age. By all means, research all the time. But let's focus at least now on our paper for this class. So our goal here in philosophy, as far as writing a philosophy research paper is concerned, our goal is to find articles or books or whatever that show the conversation in academia as it is now. Now, what I want to stress is, this is the way academia works on a very basic level. I know that you're only seeing, a small part of it, that as a community college student, or even as, an undergraduate as a major institution, you're taking classes, and you're doing assignments, and you're probably, scratching your head from time to time, why do your professors make you write all these papers? What's the point? And probably, most of what is college for you actually has a lot more to do with your social life, or what the SGA is doing, or, what your day-to-day existence is, keeping your work life and your school life both in check, balancing your various responsibilities. I get that. I understand that. But from the top, academia is designed to be a place where information is both generated, respected, protected, revered, and discussed. We talked a little bit in this class about Socrates and Plato and the original, capital A academy that Plato founded. The academy, the, first ever instance of the university, was designed on the same principles that Plato and Socrates had initially. And you'll remember, the original basis for how do we learn things is Socrates and Euthyphro standing in the King Archon's court talking about piety. or Socrates and Meno at Meno's house talking about virtue, or Socrates and Thrasymachus talking about justice. Like, the principle behind the whole of academia, the whole university system, is you have a conversation and you get knowledge. Like, knowledge only happens when experts in their field talk to one another. And I realize that you're probably not attentive to all of that. Like, as on your level, that is a professor at the community college speaking to you, like lecturing to you, imparting their knowledge to you. But the fact of the matter is, like, every level of the collegiate system embodies this principle to some degree. Like, you pay so I can have a conversation with you about philosophy, so I can teach you how to do philosophy. If you go to a major four-year university, you're going to be looking at a bunch of professors who are experts in their field at some level, who, you know, for the most part, they are in their department discussing the way that their discipline works, whether it's humanities or biology or chemistry or physics or philosophy. Like, as much as they are there to teach classes to you, that's kind of the side project. Their main goal is to interact with their colleagues, to have conversations about what their discipline is supposed to look like, to change their discipline, to move the conversation forward. And if you're at like a heavy-duty Ivy League institution, if you're at friggin' Harvard or Oxford or Yale or Princeton, you are basically just going to be able to sit in the room while these conversations happen. Like, some major deal, the primary expert in their field is going to stand up at the front of the class and tell you or talk to another person about their ideas, and you are just going to sit there and take notes and watch. Like, you will not raise your hand, you will not have anything to contribute in most cases. You are just there to take in the awesomeness that is their knowledge and expertise. But the goal for the professor is to have the conversation, to participate with their colleagues, to write to one another, and to sort of play around with ideas, to kick around these concepts and build new ideas and ways of looking at the world out of them. That's what I mean by the conversation. But that's tricky. When you're doing a research paper, like, your job is to basically familiarize yourself with the whole of the conversation all at one go. And that's impossible. Like, people study what is going on in academia about any given scholar or any given subject for years. Like, they write their thesis on it, and then they are an expert, and they fully understand what the conversation is. You will not get there in this research paper. There's not nearly enough time. I don't care when you start. I don't care how hard you work on it. You will not get to that level in my class. And that's fine. Mine is an intro class. That's kind of the point. My goal is to get you aware of the conversation and to show you how to access the conversation, how to get a tiny little glimpse, like scrape off one little shard of ice from this giant iceberg, and to find the big bits of the conversation, the major parts, the major contributors. Like, this is the goal. Your research paper should ideally be you talking about the philosophers we've talked in class in reference to the conversation as it is happening in higher circles of academia. Now, with that in mind, there are positive sources that will get you closer to that, and there are sources that aren't going to help you at all. We'll talk about those in a moment. On your level, as you're sitting there like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm not aware of any of this that's going on, or I have no idea where even to start. Don't worry, we will get to that point. For my purposes, the other thing that I definitely want to emphasize about your paper and your tiny little view of the conversation is it should be controversial. When I say that this is a conversation that is happening, what I mean is that this is a conversation that is happening because there are multiple sides to this argument, and it hasn't resolved. And I know that, like, this is kind of specific to philosophy insofar as it's like, oh, well, some of these questions we've been debating for 2,500 years, and we still don't have an answer. Is there a God? Is there not a God? People still disagree. Yeah, but this is also something that's in all spheres of academia. Earlier today, I successfully put together my mythology lecture, and the fact of the matter is there are tons of scholars who are debating about what Homer meant by a certain passage in the Iliad or the Odyssey. There's tons of scholars who debate what was the Greek lifestyle like. What were their views on the military? What were their views on homosexuality? What were their views on women? Like, there is a debate that's going on, even as we speak. It's not resolved. History is alive, and the business of doing history is still alive. And this goes for the sciences as well. Like, if you're hanging out with a bunch of physicists, they're not going to sit around totally in agreement about the nature of quantum mechanics and relativity. They're going to debate. What did Einstein mean by X? Is it in fact the way that the universe works? What did, Stephen Hawking mean by Y? Is it in fact in line with what we understand now? Does it line up with the data? How do we interpret the information? Because the interpretation is, like I said, controversial. Something that can be debated. So when you are picking your topic, when you are deciding what you're going to write about, don't pick something super obvious or super stupid. For example, there is not a debate happening about whether or not the Earth is flat. I realize that the internet thinks that there is a debate happening, that there are certain people out there who are like, the Earth is flat, the Earth has always been flat, there's this giant conspiracy, they're pulling the wool over your eyes, wake up, sheeple! No, that's not a conversation that anyone is having. That is a bunch of dumb people and people in bad faith going on the internet and just, harassing scientists. Those people are trolls and assholes 90% of the time. There are probably a small minority of people who do in fact believe that this is the case. They can be successfully disregarded. But as much as the Earth is flat is not a debatable position, neither is the Earth is round. Because there isn't a conversation there. This is resolved. Academia is not debating this subject. For your purposes, from philosophy's standpoint, that means don't take a position that is manifestly obvious. If you are going to go guns blazing into the discussion saying, I believe that God could exist, that is a little bit debatable, but it's not a strong position to take. It is basically saying what everybody agrees with. There is an ambiguity to the evidence whether or not God exists. Do not take a waffling position. Do not take a manifestly obvious position. Do not argue for something that is so, blatantly clear to everyone in the room. Instead, take something that's more specific, more controversial, something that can be debated. Don't take the position God could exist. Take the position God does exist. Take the position that God doesn't exist. Take the position that God can't exist, or it can't be proven that God exists. These are all legitimate defensible positions and positions that have a counterargument. A position that is debatable, objectionable. Somebody could argue the other way around. It's sometimes tricky to figure out what is a controversial position. I know that the assumption that we all sort of accept is, everybody's got their own opinions and everybody's opinions are valuable. And I have frequently said bullshit to that, and I will say it again now, bullshit. Yes, everybody does have different opinions. Many of those opinions are dumb. Do not pay attention to opinions that are not grounded in some sort of fact and some sort of reliable evidence that cannot be debated and cannot be debated by actual academics pursuing knowledge. Seek out reliable sources. Seek out smart people, experts. And when you seek them out, look at what they find to be a controversial topic. Look at the things that they are still debating about now. Because if they're still debating about it, it's still a living conversation. It's still something that is worth discussing. And they may get short with each other. There is nothing more fun in academia than watching two philosophy professors or two, noted scholars literally, throwing down over this tiny little bit of minutia. There's this famous story that was circulating not so long ago about Edgar Allan Poe scholars, and there were apparently all these Poe scholars at this big convention, and they were discussing whether or not Poe was a racist. And apparently, they're going back and forth, no, this is a metaphor for colonialism, or no, this is a metaphor for, indigenous peoples being inferior. And apparently some guy who wasn't actually a Poe scholar, he was just, there to see what was going on, he raises his hand and he asks, so what about the orangutan and the murders of the Rue Morgue? Which is this one story that Poe wrote, and the orangutan is apparently like this major potential symbol for racism, and like the entire room, as soon as he brought it up, went dead silent. And whoever was speaking, whoever had the microphone, apparently took a moment, and he just like bent forward and he's like, we do not discuss the orangutan. Like, it's just so freaking controversial that, like, Poe scholars will beat each other up over this. And this happens in philosophy, and this happens in every academic discipline there is. Like, it is a freaking, like, shark fest of... It can get into pure bloodbath territory. And if you've hit on something like that, then you're going to have a lot of material to work with. You are looking for controversy. Like, at this stage, you can't get into the serious nuances of these positions. Look for the big fights. Look for the big players. Look for the people who are having this debate and who are getting worked up about it and who are really angry about the orangutan. That's what you want to find. So with that in mind, here are the sources that you are looking for, and here are the sources that you are not looking for. Your grade A, Angus level, perfect source that you definitely want to include in your paper if you can find it is a peer-reviewed source by a leading scholar in the field. This is like a peer-reviewed article in a periodical. This is a peer-reviewed book by a major like scholar or professor at an institution. Like, this is the gold mine. If you can find capital T, capital B, the book on whatever you're writing about, then you are golden. And sometimes those books exist. Like, I have a handful of those books on my shelf. Like, the one book that is the source for everyone in the field. It happens. Or maybe it's the article. Maybe it is like, this guy wrote this article and it made such a big deal that people are still talking about it 40 or 50 years after the fact. This is like the quintessential explanation of this particular philosophical position. That's what you want. But you'll notice there are two dimensions here. First is peer-reviewed, second, leading scholars. Peer-reviewed just means it's something that academia has embraced. Like, whether or not you agree with a scholar, like, the business that a scholar has to go through in order to get to the point that he is a noted expert recognized as a scholar is rigorous. Like, I haven't even gotten there yet. I just have a couple master's degrees. What I'm talking about is like a PhD level scholar. And to get your PhD, you usually have to write a dissertation, like a giant 300-page thesis on your particular topic. And you will not only do that with the guidance of a scholar who is walking you through every step of the way, but you're also going to stand in front of a panel of scholars at the end of this, and they're going to tear your book apart, and probably tear you apart in the process. They are going to question you, they are going to debate you, they are going to ask you about this scholar and that scholar, and some of them you've heard of, and some of them you've never heard of, and you're just trying to, like, keep everything going. That's what I mean by peer-reviewed. This happens for literally everything that gets published in a scholarly journal. Every major book that comes out of, like, Oxford Press. There were a bunch of people who looked at it and said, what about this? Can you fix this point? I think you're misrepresenting this thinker. That's what I mean by peer-reviewed. Look for scholarly resources, not, like, bullshit on the internet. But we'll get back to that. By leading scholars, I mean the people who are driving the conversation forward. The people who everyone is talking about. Most of the time, these are probably, like, major head honcho professors at major institutions, like either huge research universities or like the Ivy Leagues. They have a huge reputation in their field. Everybody knows their name. Everybody knows their work. Everybody talks about their work. Again, you're probably saying, how do I know who's a major scholar and who's like a minnow, who's the big player and who's just like the, biddy league? We'll get there. Just keep in mind, those are the two criteria here. Peer-reviewed sources by leading scholars in the field. That is what you are looking for. That is your, A-level research piece. But that's not all that you can look for. Like, sometimes it's just not going to happen. We're all under quarantine. You don't have access to the library. Interlibrary loan's probably going to be slow if it exists at all. You might not be able to find it. So relax. There are other options. Second, you can use other historical sources. Like, we have just scratched the surface of the history of philosophy. Like, in 2,500 years, a lot more people have been writing than just, Plato, Aquinas, Descartes, and Hume. There are tons of other scholars who have weighed in on these topics. Like, if you want to write a paper on the problem of evil and the existence of God, well, maybe try reading Pascal. He has a great argument, the Pascal's wager. Or try Epicurus. He's the guy who initially framed the argument, the problem of evil. There are tons of major philosophers in the history of philosophy who have weighed in on these conversations and who have something really relevant to say. Go find them instead. That's fine. Use your textbook. The key will be finding who they are, like finding the specific passage, so you don't have to read like the entirety of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason in order to get to his arguments for the existence of God. But nonetheless, like, that's what you'll find online. Still, using Kant is a viable solution for I need research outside of the stuff we've read in class. That would work. So don't be shy about those. Feel free to include them. They're typically pretty easy to track down because, again, they're very old, which means they're all online for free. So feel free to go to Project Gutenberg. Feel free to go to, like, other philosophical sites, like there are sites for classical writers like Plato and Aristotle. You can track them down. It's easy. By all means, go ahead and use them. They're not as great as, again, peer-reviewed sources by leading scholars in the field, but I will totally give you credit for them, especially if you're like dealing with their ideas in a really meaningful way. The third thing you can definitely use is popular publications by scholars. And this one's a little vague. We'll definitely talk about it more once I walk you through the actual process of research, because it'll become more clear at that point. But what I'm saying is they're major scholars, or at least they're minor scholars. They're reputable in the field. They're experts in what they're talking about. But they're not doing something peer-reviewed. They're doing something for general consumption. This happens all the time. And it happens all over the place, too. Like in magazines like The Atlantic or The Guardian or The Economist or Time Magazine. Like, you'll occasionally get philosophers weighing in on certain subjects. This new perspective on free will, or this new argument for the existence of God, or this new, revelation about the way the mind works. This happens. Ethicists and scholars in philosophy get interviewed for all sorts of weird reasons, and some of them are even hired by magazines to just write columns for them from time to time. It brings prestige to the magazine, it gets the scholar's name out there, everybody wins. The trick, though, is that these are not peer-reviewed articles. No other scholars are reading these before they go to press. An editor for the paper is going to read it before it goes to press, and mostly he's just looking for typos and grammatical errors and how to fit it on the page. He doesn't care about the content because he doesn't know a damn thing about the content, which is fine. He's publishing the expert's testimony. He doesn't need to be able to vet it. He's got other responsibilities. So if you find those articles, if you find, somebody writing randomly about free will, or somebody writing randomly about the existence of God online, it could be, a legit scholar. Vet them, make sure that you're not listening to some, crazy rando, but it could be a reputable source. That's okay. You can quote those people. I don't recommend it, certainly not in comparison to peer-reviewed sources by leading scholars in the field, but nonetheless, popular publications, they work. You can use them as your sources. I wouldn't rely on them exclusively. If you can avoid them, do it, but they'll work, especially under the circumstances. What I don't want is, first, Wikipedia and other summaries. By all means, use Wikipedia, use summary pages, use the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, go find YouTube videos, use summaries to guide your knowledge, but do not quote them in the paper. I'm looking for arguments. I'm looking for scholars fighting with other scholars. I'm looking for controversial positions that you can either adopt or reject. This guy backs up your thoughts on God, or this guy disagrees with you on God, but he is wrong because. That's what I'm looking for. So Wikipedia will help you get to that point, as we'll see, but Wikipedia is not the stopping point. Wikipedia will give you tons of information about the conversation. It will not show you the actual conversation as it is happening. So use it carefully. Use it to get yourself to the better resources. Don't use it all by itself. Likewise, don't quote randos on the internet. And that's, I realize that's like a large category. Obviously, like, there are tons of crackpots who have their own blogs and who insist that they know stuff about philosophy, and they don't. That includes me. Like, you might very well, I doubt it, but it's possible, theoretically, that you could stumble across my blog while you're doing this paper in philosophy. If you do, I expect you to ignore me. I expect you to not be able to recognize me, but also to completely ignore me. Because when you go to my About page on my blog, it will say, I have a master's degree, and that's it. Like, I know about philosophy. Those are not credentials. If you really want a reputable scholar in the field, you're talking about somebody with a full PhD, who is teaching at a major university, who legitimately has something good to say, who is more than just a teacher, who is an actual expert in the field, who is publishing articles and is a big deal. I am not that. Neither is 90% of the crap that you will run across on the internet, even the popular stuff. Like, people who produce YouTube essays, generally not reputable scholars. Doesn't mean that they're not knowledgeable, doesn't mean that they're disseminating bullshit, it just means that they don't have the credentials. It means that they got sidetracked, like I did, got stuck teaching, undergraduate students, or didn't even do that at all and just decided to market their skills otherwise. That's fine, good for them, gives you better knowledge, but it's not going to work for your paper. You cannot quote people who do not have, like, serious credentials as far as that's concerned. But keep in mind, too, that this also includes scholars. Like, scholars do more than just write articles and get them published in major periodicals, write books that all of their, like, all of academia reads. They also have their own blogs. They also do interviews. They do all sorts of stuff. To give you an example, like, I had a student a couple years ago who was really enamored with Slavoj Žižek, who is this big deal philosopher who is, like, doing all sorts of stuff these days. Like, the jury's still out on whether he's a major deal or just, like, loud. This happens sometimes. But he does a lot of interviews. He gets around a lot. He has lots of debates and discussions with people. If you are going to find information by Slavoj Žižek on whatever you're writing about, that's fine. But look for his papers. Look for his books. Look for the peer-reviewed stuff. At the very least, look for an article that he wrote in a major publication. An editorial he wrote for the New York Times, or an editorial he wrote for The Economist, or, something else that is really reputable. If you find Slavoj Žižek's blog, or Slavoj Žižek just, like, ranting at a camera, please ignore it. He is, for all intents and purposes, a rando on the internet in that situation. I don't care what his credentials are at that point. If he doesn't have any, if he doesn't have anyone looking over his shoulder reading what he's writing and checking it out and confirming his credentials or his reputation, then I don't know where it came from and I can't trust it. And neither can you. So avoid randos on the internet. Both the ones that look smart and the ones that don't look smart. Both of them are untrustworthy. Look for reputable periodicals and preferably scholarly sources. So let's do this, shall we? Like, let's actually put our money where our mouth is and talk about how this gets done. So I realize, like, the first move of any student who wants to do a research paper, like, you're kind of inclined to just go to the library page and just try your luck, click some stuff and see what happens. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's go to the library. Yep, we're going to check at the ebook collection, library materials. All right. So let's assume we're going to do a paper on free will, because conveniently it's not a topic you can do in this class, so all of the research will not be helpful to you. This is what comes up if I just type free will in the search bar for the library. I get Orphan Train, first edition, which apparently has 3 copies. What is this? Is this like the novel for this year? This is what I get for not paying attention. Confound it. So we get Orphan Train, which is apparently a novel. We get The Myth of Choice, Personal Responsibility in a World of Limits, which honestly looks fairly promising. We get Mastering AutoCAD. What the? AutoCAD? Like the architectural software? That's not helpful. We get Reading Chuck Palahniuk, American Monsters and Literary Mayhem. That's the Fight Club guy, in case you don't know. Like, he writes novels for a living. so not relevant to us. Einstein, his life, and no. Dissecting Stephen King. What? Modern physics. The complete MB. What? What did. I don't want to dump on Sussex County Community College, and I don't actually intend to here. The fact of the matter is, you're going to find crap wherever you do this. Like, anytime that you go onto the library database and just type in your topic, you're going to get weird stuff. Like, I don't know why JSTOR's database is poorly optimized. That, I'm sure, is part of it. Like, library databases are just entirely another mess altogether. Like, if I do this at Montclair, same thing's going to happen. I'm going to get a bunch of crap that isn't helpful for my purposes. Like, we may have one whole book here that's especially helpful. This one looks pretty useful. But that's it. The rest of this is just various flavors of garbage. So, no. Get rid of that. Instead, use a Google search. Like, I realize that most professors kind of poo-poo the use of Google as your starting point, but seriously, it will give you the most compendious information, it will get you the most popular information. It tends to shorten your process by a lot. Now, results may vary with Google. Keep in mind that Google is tailoring the algorithm to your personal preferences all the time, which for me means, surprise, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is the first thing that comes up. But you might get something completely different. So you will have to sift through whatever your results are once you get going. But let's look at what we actually get when we type in the topic here. I typed in free will, and we got this. We get a dictionary definition, which I don't recommend that you use. Like, unless you're going to talk about etymology, it's really not all that helpful. Look instead for the philosophical definitions. We get people asking questions. What is a person's free will? Which, not helpful. We also get a whole bunch of images, which you'll notice a couple of these actually do look promising. It doesn't take long in the image section to get us to a crash course video, which actually would be really helpful in this situation. Like, you could watch it, you could get a decent idea of the conversation that's happening. Crash course actually does a lot of discussion of philosophy, so you would get some pretty valuable results. Again, you don't want to quote it because it's just doing summary, but it's at least a good start for, like, understanding what you're talking about. We also get free will philosophers, we'll come back to them, and we get books on free will. And I realize that, like, right now you were like, yes, I have the answer. We have a book, it's called Free Will, what could possibly go wrong? All I need to do is, like, get the Google preview, and bam, I've got my resources. I'll quote it a couple of times, and we'll call it a day. But this is actually a feint. That's not how this works. If you look at this book, Free Will by Sam Harris, we have a belief in free will touches nearly everything that human beings value, etc., etc., etc. Sam Harris is the author of the best-selling books The End of Faith, Letter to a Christian Nation, The Moral Landscape, Free Will, and Lying. He received a degree in philosophy from Stanford University and a PhD in neuroscience from UCLA. Notice a degree in philosophy, but a PhD in neuroscience. This guy is a neuroscientist who also probably studied philosophy at some point in his history. Maybe he's got an undergraduate degree, maybe he's got a master's degree. We don't know, and the fact of the matter is, it's not telling us because all we're getting is degree. So probably it's not terribly helpful. Now, observe, we can search for him and probably get more information. But this is probably going to end up being a dead end. Neuroscience is interesting. It definitely has bearing on the business of free will and determinism, but it's not the thing that I want you to look at specifically. If you get on the psychology track, you will find a completely different world and a completely different set of sources than you will find in philosophy. I am encouraging you to stay on philosophy. Pay attention to philosophers, not psychologists, not neuroscientists. So Sam Harris might be a great useful resource for another paper, but not this one so much. So let's back to our initial page. Let's look at some of the sites we've come up with. We've got the Free Will Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy page, which, if you remember in class, I have been talking about the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy since day one, so probably a good resource, and we will revisit it. We have the Wikipedia page, also useful. Probably want to check that out. We've got the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy page, which basically, like, pick two of these three and you'll be good to go. You don't need to use both the IEP and Stanford Encyclopedia. And then we've got this Atlantic article, which I do in fact want to talk about. So let's actually start there. Let's start with the Atlantic article, because here we have an actual person who is making an actual argument about free will. Specifically, there's no such thing as free will, which is a pretty compelling, controversial argument. This sounds like good stuff. And if you look at it, we've got this whole argument. We have some discussion of major philosophers, so that's exciting. They're probably pretty reliable. We have talk about Darwin. We have talk about other things. But you'll notice mostly we're talking about brain chemistry. Once again, we're kind of on psychology and physiology. So it's not entirely a philosophical perspective that we're looking at. So this might not be all that especially useful. But let's dig a little deeper. What is the Atlantic, actually? Assuming you don't know, what I would recommend is A, go to their homepage, and B, check all the way down at the bottom where it says About. Let's look at our history. Since 1857, the Atlantic has been challenging assumptions and pursuing truth. So we know great storytelling is a part of great journalism. So this is clearly a newspaper. This is a journalistic enterprise. It is a long-standing journalistic enterprise. It's been around for 150 years. But even so, as much as it's exciting that the founders of the Atlantic gathered in Boston in the spring of 1857, that's not what we're looking for here. But let's check a different angle. Who the heck is Stephen Cave? Notice, your author is also an extremely important consideration here. So let's click on Stephen Cave's name. We get all of his stuff. We get this article, Free Will Exists and is Measurable. We get this article, There's No Such Thing as Free Will, but we're better off believing it anyway. Dude, pick a side. We also will find various other stuff if we keep poking around, but we're not apparently getting a whole lot here. So now is the time to do what is frequently known as lateral research. Who the heck is Stephen Cave? Well, Stephen Cave holds a PhD in philosophy from Cambridge University, so that's promising. Before turning to full-time writing, worked as a diplomat. He writes regularly for the Financial Times and also contributes to the New York Times. So this is a philosopher who often does popular articles, is what we can say. He is writing to Financial Times for some reason, and to the New York Times. He has, however, published at least one book, namely Immortality, The Quest to Live Forever, and How It Drives Civilization. So that's cool. He's got a book. That makes him a fairly reputable philosopher. The fact that he has a PhD in philosophy from Cambridge also indicates that he is a professional philosopher. He's got his own TED Talk. That's exciting. Come on. This dude's apparently pretty legit. But also notice, what is his book on? Immortality, The Quest to Live Forever, and How It Drives Civilization. Is that really about free will? No. This is apparently about gods and myths, and apparently about, us dealing with our own mortality. Even his TED Talk, The 4 Stories We Tell Ourselves About Death. He seems interesting, but he also seems like he's kind of parlaying his popularity for the sake of getting popularity. He is using his scholarly credentials to make arguments he's not entirely qualified to talk about. We've got all this stuff in his article that he wrote about psychology, but the dude has a PhD in philosophy. The guy has this book about immortality. What does that have to do with free will? So, Mr. Cave is dangerous. You could definitely quote this article in your paper, but I would be suspicious of it. I wouldn't call this a primary resource. Maybe you argue against him as an object lesson. This is what popular thinkers and philosophers have to say about free will, and this is why it has nothing to do with, what is actually being said about free will by major people in the conversation. That would be an interesting take. I would accept that. That would be fine, but I would expect to see major scholars being pitted against him. So again, do your lateral research. Search for the people who wrote your papers. See what they actually have to say and what their expertise is actually about. So let's ditch the Atlantic. Maybe later if we totally run dry on other sources. Instead, let's go back and see about the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and Wikipedia. Let's start with Wikipedia because this is probably the one that you're most familiar with. This is Wikipedia. If you haven't used it, use it. It's awesome. And it is really useful here. you'll notice there's this whole discussion. Here's the history or the discussion of free will in Western philosophy. Here are some major positions. Incompatibilism, namely like free will is incompatible with determinism, and compatibilism, the idea that it is in fact compatible. So like there's this whole breakdown of all of these different positions, all of these different thinkers, all of these different ideas in this discussion of free will. This is pretty systematic. It's light, like you can read it, you can skim it, but this is a pretty good place to start. Like even if you just look at these ideas up here, like here is a description of the different positions. Determinism suggests that only one course of events is possible, which is inconsistent with the existence of free will. Ancient Greek philosophy identified this issue. The view that conceives free will as incompatible with determinism is called incompatibilism and encompasses both metaphysical libertarianism and hard determinism, i.e. we definitely don't have free will, and we definitely do have free will. So already we have a rough idea of some of the major positions, and again, because Wikipedia, they're all links. You want to know more about determinism? Let's go learn more about determinism. You want to learn more about metaphysical libertarianism? Well, here's the page on metaphysical libertarianism. Great. So this is a good place to start. Again, you don't want to quote this. It's just summary, not participating in the argument. But we already have a decent understanding of the concepts involved, about the various positions that are there to be explored. We can work with this. Even more importantly, if we do want to start digging deeper, Wikipedia is equipped for that. You'll notice every Wikipedia article is admittedly written by randos on the internet, which I said to avoid. But Wikipedia is rigorously vetted by all of the randos. Like, go to any talk section on Wikipedia, and you will see the debate that people are having about the article. Here are the problems with the article. Here are, maybe we should have a new introduction. Here is this other views section, which is apparently debatable. Like, I'm not even seeing why we have this section. We have, is it biased? Like people are debating this. So you can see this and see people having this conversation. You can see the issues that have been identified here. So we already have a sense of like where the conversation is circulating around this article, but also keep in mind this article has footnotes. It has references. So if you go to this discussion of incompatibilism or compatibilism, you will find references to different philosophers. Incompatibilism is the position that free will and determinism are logically incompatible. Hard determinists such as Dolbach are those incompatibilists who accept determinism and reject free will. In contrast, metaphysical libertarians, like we said, such as Thomas Reid, Peter Van Inwagen, and Robert Kane, are incompatibilists who accept free will and reject determinism. Now notice, a lot of these names were right here in the list of free will philosophers. Peter Van Inwagen, Robert Kane. That's because Google is siphoning the information from Wikipedia and other sources. It's doing this job for you. So if you look at the plus 40 more, you're going to find a whole bunch of reliable philosophers on this subject. You will see them quoted here. You scroll further down, you'll find hard determinists, you'll find different arguments here. But even more importantly, let's say you do want to examine what Peter Van Inwagen has to say. Obviously, we can just look at his entire history, like he's got his own Wikipedia page, so that's his own thing. We can also look at the resources down here. This is the bibliography for this page, the references section, and it is invaluable. All good Wikipedia pages have a solid citation page. And notice this goes on for a while. Like there's 200 plus citations here, which I admit is a lot. Like this is arguably too much. But seeing as every one of them is tied to the actual text, if you're like, okay, let's talk about determinism, you can click on the link, and apparently Parkinson is a major contributor to this, or a major voice in this discussion. If you look through here for those names that we were recognizing, like let's see if we can find Van Inwagen as a potential source. Here's Thomas Reid, here's Galen Strawson, we'll come back to him. We've got Robert Kane, we've got John Searle, let's look at Kane, because here we've seen his name over and over again. Apparently he has this article from 2007 called Libertarianism in the book Four Views on Free Will, A Great Debates in Philosophy. It doesn't take a lot for us to find the book. There's literally a link right here. Here's the ISBN number. So if we copy this and paste it... Well, that's not helpful. Here we go, Four Views on Free Will. Here is the book. Here are the writers, the contributors. We could track this book down either through the library or through Amazon or even by just previewing it here on Google. You can track down the ebook, order it for our purposes if you've got extra money to spare. If not, that's fine. Don't feel obligated to, for sure. But we've already got a resource, something that we could possibly use. And this is a good one. There are a bunch of 4 and 5 views on various philosophical and theological subjects. They are awesome because they give a lot of different perspectives simultaneously. So already we have one possible really good resource. But, again, let's assume that we can't use that resource. You've got a limited amount of time, you've got a limited amount of money, you can't just, throw money at books and make them come to you and then use them for research. So let's keep digging, shall we? Let's go to our last major source from our original Google search. We've got our Wikipedia page, we've got our general understanding of how this subject works. Let's dig deeper. Let's look at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Now, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is much like Wikipedia. It is a summary page. It is about the whole history of the discipline, all of the different perspectives in play, everything about that. The difference is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is seriously and strictly vetted by philosophers. The people who write these pages are not randos on the internet, they are legit scholars. If you come down and find it is written by Timothy O'Connor at indiana.edu, Christopher Franklin at gcc.edu, these are major scholars in the field. These are people who are legit professors at major institutions. So you already know this is a fairly reliable source. You can track down the author and citation info easily. You can track down why they are really important. You can track down the history of the corrections and changes from when it was first written. There's a lot here that you can use. And once again, it doesn't take a lot for you to go, okay, who is Timothy O'Connor? There it is, Tim O'Connor's website, Indiana University, Bloomington. Now we've got all of his credentials. Now we know he is a philosopher whose chief interests lie in metaphysics, philosophy of mind, and philosophy of religion. Great. We know that this guy is a reputable source. It is being published by a reputable scholarly website. This should count for all intents and purposes as peer-reviewed, but it's summary, so it's not exactly what we're looking for. We need one step deeper. Now, you'll notice, again, just like Wikipedia, this is summary. This gives you a lot of different perspectives on these subjects. And if you scroll down to the table of contents, you can see here are the historical discussions of free will in the ancient and medieval period, as well as in the modern period in the 20th century. We can talk about the nature of free will, the metaphysical grounding of free will. How does it relate to moral responsibility? Does it mean freedom to do otherwise? Yes or no? Are there other sort of accounts to be taken in mind? This is all good stuff. It will give you a good understanding of your topic. You will also see, do we have free will? Arguments against the reality of free will, arguments for the reality of free will. Already you will have a decent synopsis here of the positions against and for free will. But even more than that, if you dig just a little bit deeper, here we have arguments against the reality of free will. The first line, the most radical a priori argument, is that free will is not merely contingently absent, but is impossible. In recent decades, this argument is most associated with Galen Strawson. We have a name. We have the guy who represents this position in the contemporary discussion. So once again, all we have to do is scroll down to the, once again, extensive bibliography that is provided on this site, find Galen Strawson's name, ta-da, and we have 3 major resources relevant to what we're talking about. We have his book, from 1986, Freedom and Belief. We have an article, The Impossibility of Moral Responsibility, and we have another article, The Unhelpfulness of Indeterminism. And if you're wondering, is Galen Strawson legit? Again, he's one of the guys who comes up in our big list of philosophers. So all we have to do is click on his name, and here he is. Galen Strawson, British analytic philosopher, born in 1952, major education. We can track down more about him and guarantee that he is, in fact, like one of the major sources here. At this point, we can actually go look for the article. So let's look for The Impossibility of Moral Responsibility. Here is a legit article by a legit expert on the topic that we're writing about based on what Stanford Encyclopedia has told us. So all we need to do at this point is go to Google Scholar. Let's type in Galen Strawson Impossibility and see what... Oh, there it is. Literally the first thing that comes up is the article we were looking for. All we had to do was give it the name and the author, and we've got it. Here is the citation, but even more important, you'll notice there's the PDF. It's right there. All we have to do is click on it, and we will be able to download the entire article. Yes, thank you, JSTOR. I realize that you want to check me out first. But here it is. The article. The Impossibility of Moral Responsibility by Galen Strawson. Here it is. The whole thing for you to read and cite and understand why this is such a big deal in the discussion. This is what I want you to cite. Not the summary pages like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy or Wikipedia. Not the randos like Stephen Cave on The Atlantic. I want you to cite Galen Strawson's argument and why it is the most representative argument for the, against the position of free will that there is at this point in time. We checked him out. He is the guy. Stanford says so. He is a reputable source. His article is legit. There's your first source. And then you can go back. You can find Van Inwagen. Here is Van Inwagen's papers. Let's look at his books. He's got Thinking About Free Will in Cambridge. We can look that up in Google Scholar as well. Look, this one's even friggin' 2 years ago. 3 years ago. Thinking About Free Will, Van Inwagen. So now we have the book citation. Now all we have to do is track this down. Oh look, part of the book is right here. We can look through it. It's admittedly not the whole thing, but this is what we got to work with. So here we have arguments for compatibilism. We have, oh my gosh, it's good stuff. But also, don't feel limited by this. Notice right here we have cited by 723. If in fact you're looking at this article and you don't have a link, click the cited by and you'll find all of these other people who are using the article that you found and thought were relevant. These are probably also good sources, and surprise, they also have PDF resources. So we've got a whole major, group of scholars all collected by Google Scholar for us to examine and look at. So this is the process I recommend. Start with your regular Google search on your topic. Find the Wikipedia page and refine it based on what you're reading here, based on what it seems that the scholars are saying and what the different positions are. Once you have a decent command of what you're talking about, go look at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Find the major players. See what names keep coming up over and over and over again, like Inwagen, like Galen Strawson, like Robert Kane or Thomas Reed. And then once you've got an article that you've tracked down in these bibliographies that seems to be super, super important, go to Google Scholar and see if you can track down the article itself, because that's what you want to find. That's, as I stressed, a peer-reviewed source by a leading scholar in the field. Galen Strawson is the guy on this topic, and by tracking his article down, we have the resource, the article, the capital B book. That's what I'm looking for you, and that's what I'm looking for from you, and that's what I encourage you to find. Again, don't quote Wikipedia and other summaries. Quote the sources that they are quoting. Quote the peer-reviewed sources. Quote the popular publications when relevant. Quote the historical sources that keep coming up. Again, if you look at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, in that whole historical section, you'll find a whole bunch of scholars here as well. One fine scholarly debate on the origin of the notion of free will, but here we have, in Book 4 of the Republic, Plato posits rational spirit and repetitive aspects of the human soul. We have Aristotle agreeing. We have more about Aristotle. We have debates between the Epicureans, the Stoics, and the skeptics. We have Augustine. We have Thomas Aquinas. You should recognize these names. They're all super important, and they all have something valuable to say about the subject of free will. So read through this. If you can't find your Galen Strawsons or your Van Inwagens, then find some of the major scholars here. Like, we don't need to look for Descartes, because Descartes' one of our readings, and he obviously has a lot to say about this. But notice, the thesis that free will is compatible with determinism is true, and this is a Spinoza thing as well. Well, we didn't read Spinoza in class, and I don't even know if Spinoza's in our textbook, so let's go ahead and look for Spinoza. So Baruch Spinoza is the writer we're thinking about. A little bit more research will find that he is a major writer and that his most major book is The Ethics. And once you type in Spinoza and the Ethics, you will find the Project Gutenberg text of the Ethics in its entirety, because it was written hundreds of years ago, so it's totally in the public domain and you can download it for free. When in doubt, you can also always rely on Project Gutenberg to be able to find major historical sources for you. All you need to do is type in the writer that you're looking for, and you will find all of their works. The philosophy of Spinoza is admittedly like a summary thing, but here is the Ethics in English, and that will bring us right back to the page that we were looking at. So even if you can't find, a grade A peer-reviewed source, you can always find historical sources. They're all online for free. Don't let the quarantine discourage you from using them. You can totally track down research, even if it's not, again, like grade A peer-reviewed sources. So give it a shot. Like, this whole process took an hour, and a half of it was me explaining this page. Admittedly, I don't want to de-emphasize the fact that you should be reading all of these pages. Like, at the very least, you should give the free will page on Wikipedia a solid skim, if not a flat-out read. You should definitely be poking through the Stanford Encyclopedia page to get, a good sense of what you're dealing with here. And you will, in fact, have to read the whole of this article in its entirety if you want to be able to, quote it responsibly. But that's doable. This is 2 to 3 hours of work total, and you need maybe 1 hour more to get another really solid article, and that's it. That's how research works. If you want to become a legit expert in this field, that's what it takes. And trust me when I say it's going to be so much easier to actually write your paper when you know what you're talking about, when you've done the research, when you've seen all the different positions that are at play, when you have recognized all the different philosophers who have weighed in on the subject, when you know that Van Inwagen is on one side while Galen Strawson is on the other, and when you've read their arguments and can decide for yourself which one you believe the most. There's no cheap and easy way to do that. But trust me, this is the easiest way to get to that spot, to become knowledgeable, to be in a place where you can write a legit research paper and sound like you know what you're talking about, because at this point, you do. And again, let me stress, don't just reserve this for doing papers. I get that, half of you are taking this for a gen ed credit and you're not interested in philosophy and you're just going to blow off the assignment. That's fine. Don't do the 4-hour version of this if you're just going to aim for a B. This is if you really want to blow me out of the water, if you want to show me A-level work, this is what A-level work looks like. But whatever you do, even if you don't do it for my class, be aware of being able to do it. Make sure you know how. The day will come when you are getting ready to turn in the paper for your major and you're thinking about going to grad school and you're thinking maybe making a career of this. This is what it takes. This is the process. This is how you go from being a noob to actually knowing what you're talking about, being an expert, doing the legwork. This is what it takes to produce a really good paper, and you should know how to do that. Maybe not for my class, but at some point. just so you know what you're talking about, so you can, stick it to somebody who is an idiot who is just quoting randos on the internet. That's what it takes. So I hope that this was helpful. Like, I really want you to use this. This is not just, me doing lectures for my own sake. Like, there's a reason why I went to the trouble of doing the video lecture on this one. And that is because I want you to be prepared. I want you to be able to go into this and be able to do it. To, like, actually get the job done. To be able to research rigorously, come up with legit peer-reviewed sources, and to be able to, speak intelligently about what's going on in the conversation. So, again, I hope that was helpful, and I will talk to you in the Q&A.